Hey everyone, I'm Tamara Rubin, Lead Safe Mama, leadsafemama.com. I'm from Portland, Oregon, and I'm here in North Carolina to have a conversation with community members, and I wanted to introduce the other folks that are here, have them introduce themselves. So we're doing this socially distanced and with masks, and we'll take turns being in front of the camera. All right. This is delay, so just ignore the delay. The screen to watch is now.
Hello.
How many people are watching?
This is Lorisa Seibel. I'll just take off my mask for a second. I'm with Reinvestment Partners, the Healthy Homes and Lead Poisoning Prevention Program, and I've been talking with families about protecting their children from lead, and as well offering free lead testing, which I can do inside, or they can do it with a kit that I can provide to them. So I hope you check out Reinvestment Partners, Healthy Homes and Lead Poisoning Prevention page and make an appointment if you're in Durham. Thanks.
Yeah, you can. I don't know if you can see you both though. Why don't you do a second?
Oh, okay. You can see me dancing.
If you stand behind her, it'll be perfect.
So, hi, my name is Selena Smith, and this is Iana Faison.
Hi.
We are with Peach. We are representing the partnership of effort of the advancement of children's health, and we focus on lead poisoning in children. The organization is a nonprofit organization that was established in August of 2007, and we focus on making sure homes are clean and lead free, and we're protecting children in the process. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day.
All right. Okay. So, does anybody else want to introduce themselves?
You want to come here, a leader here?
Well, should we start? We're going to have a conversation about some consumer goods that you brought. You brought
Yeah.
something. So since we're in North Carolina, I don't have the XRF handy, so I'm not doing testing. I'm just using my X-ray vision, which I have a lot of experience using.
We have a couple of, America, we have a lot of stories, so.
All right. Well, I'll talk about each one that way, so people can know about these.
You all want to cheers?
Oh. Yeah,
And I brought some things too to share. So
I'm fine with standing.
Okay.
I'm gonna let Iana.
I've never once tested a Mr. Potato Head that was positive for lead. I don't know, have you or anyone you know have?
No.
The nice thing about Mr. Potato Head, and there might be some vintage ones. Actually, I'm trying to think. If you had a vintage one from the 70s or the 80s, I would expect that some of the reds and yellow plastics might be positive for lead. But the newer ones, and I'm not sure if these are marked with an age, they should have a date on the inside. There's like, on the inside there's a marking. I'm too old to read it without a magnifying glass. But
It says 2010.
yeah, so that's an interesting year because the CPSC-IA, the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act, was from 2008. It followed. It was already in the works, as I understand it, but it followed the Thomas the Tank Engine recall, and so with the Thomas the Tank Engine recall, they pushed it through, and unfortunately, they tiered in how companies had to comply. So there's phased compliance for toys. I can take off my mask so people can see my lips. There might be better. But so there's phased compliance for toys and items intended for use by children. So I tell people that anything after 2011 is actually the best period for toys, because some types of toys and children's items are still being phased in 2008, 9, 10, and then after 2011 everything was compliant. But because this is a major brand and it's post 2008, it's likely that it's totally fine. The other way you know it's like that it's unlikely to be leaded is there's a quality of the plastic and rubber parts. Well, actually, this kind of has a bend to it. So if this was vintage, the bendiness of the plastic might indicate that it had lead. But the harder plastic components, like the hands and the hardness of the body, make it unlikely that it would have lead unless it was older. And so.
Okay, I'm trying to find like all of the popular toys.
Yeah, sure. Well, so something like this again. The newer plastic is going to be fine. A vintage one. If I haven't actually tested any of these that have been positive, but the yellow and red plastics are more likely to be positive for lead. Hopefully, people can hear. Okay. And so I would not expect this to test positive at all. The batteries, of course, are another story. The batteries can have lead, and they're really dangerous for children. And so this is a good example of a really good toy in that it has a screw holding the battery in place. Those ones where the battery compartments pop out without a screw are a little more problematic. But your kid's not going to get lead poison from swallowing a battery. They're going to die.
Yeah.
So they're going to die from the acids burning through their esophagus. Or there's a story about a little girl who swallowed one of those button batteries and she didn't die. So you could have a better outcome than death, but you know it's pretty bad.
It got stuck in her esophagus.
Yeah, and it burned through, and so she doesn't have any speaking capacity. And I believe she had to eat with the tubes following that. So you know it can really do some serious damage depending on where it lands. So I'm pretty hardcore about avoiding battery operated toys. But if you're going to have ones with the screw is a good place to start. Why don't you hand me my yellow block? So this is an interesting one that I've come across. So I'm on a tour of the United States right now.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah, I wanted to get away from Portland, Oregon, this is where I live, and also that was before the fires. Right now the fires are just insane, so it's just very difficult time. And so I've been driving since August 3rd, and I picked up some things along the way that were leaded. And I'd heard about these mega blocks being leaded, and I hadn't come across some high lead ones. This particular mega block is positive in the 4,000 to 8,000 parts per million lead range. So it would be in a recall status if it had been made post 2008, but these don't have the year of manufacture on them, so there's no way to know. Hi, this is my son Charlie.
Hi,
Charlie, you want to stand over my shoulder? Okay, I don't know. Okay, well, hold on just a second. You know what? Ask the ladies over there if they have an idea. Okay, can you? Or hold on one second. Charlie's 12. Charlie, come here 1 second.
Is it
number 1 or number 2?
Oh,
Okay, maybe someone can help you. Go. We're gonna be here for a while, and I've got my kids with me.
Is it just you in the car?
Oh, my older son's with him.
Did he drive?
Nah.
Oh. Well, it's like a Burger King around the corner.
Oh no. There's no porta potties or anything nearby. This is life. Here we go. Charlie, can you ask Avi to see if he can help you? Yeah, you want to go with Avi over there? Go see. Oh, that's the laundromat? No, that looks closed too. Yeah. Okay. Charlie, that could work. Charlie, we got a solution. This man can drive you somewhere to go. Okay? Sorry, guys. I don't usually have them with me, but because I'm driving all across the country, I've had them underfoot. So just wear a mask and have the windows down in the car, okay? He'll take you. That man will take you, okay? He's a friend. He'll take you to a Burger King, okay? Okay, I'll have the windows down. Yeah.
the blue Jeep or Ford.
Thank you. So with these, I don't have a huge concern for a child being poisoned unless they're putting them in their mouth. Given the size of these, they're unlikely to ingest them, thank God, but they are definitely likely to mouth them if it's a 2-year-old.
So I work in childcare and I work in the infant room, and we have a lot of blocks like that. And the infant room, they mouth a lot of the toys.
I wish you could be. Can you get on a chair and sit next to me so we can be? I'll get my mask on and we can both be on the screen.
So in the childcare, it's a lot of kids that they have these blocks and they mouth them and they chew on them. So would there be any benefits or like health concerns if they are chewing on them?
I definitely think that there would be. There's been some studies in in the United States, there were a couple studies about vintage plastic toys where there was a concern for um, the mouthing causing lead to leach. And I don't know to what degree that's been specifically quantified, or if that's like a concern that hasn't been 100% demonstrated. But I think that given that the hazard level for lead in toys is 90 parts per million in the paint or coating and 100 parts per million in the substrate, and these are testing positive in the 4,000 to 8,000 parts per million range, it's definitely concerning. And so if you don't know the origin of your toys in your childcare, I would consider disposing of them. With all toys, the logo changes over time. So I think this logo, which I don't know what it's maybe more rounded than the new logo, but it will distinguish whether or not it's an older one versus a newer one. So that's something to look at to determine it. Otherwise, if you don't know, the boxes of these blocks are, I mean, you know, they're like bags. They don't cost that much money. I think they cost like $12 to $18.
Right.
It'd be worth, if you don't know the age and they were hand-me-downs and you don't have records of when they were purchased, it'd be worth throwing them out and getting new ones. I think pretty definitely.
Yeah, I see a lot of those in childcare.
I mean, the problem is we don't know, is it wearing off? Is it creating microdust? Is it being ingested? Is it wearing down? And when you see these that have been used in the childcare, they're generally much more worn than this particular one is, you know? The edges are frayed, and you know, and how does it get that way? By being chewed on by
and
kids.
I see a lot of babies teething, and they're like, they want something hard, and they're like, they chew on everything.
Yeah, so that's worth getting new ones for sure. I would have that if their baby's teething on them. Definitely have a concern with that. So Matchbox. The great thing. Let's see what this is, a Hot Wheels brand. I'm like holding it up.
But it's so delayed.
The interesting thing about these, both Matchbox and Hot Wheels, is that I have never really tested a new one of these that was positive for lead. So when you test something like this, you have to test the plastic, the metal, the wheels, the painted part on the bottom. You know, there's so many different components. And with the newer ones, and when I say newer, like my oldest son was born in 1996, and so we don't have any that are really older than that. So in the last 24 years, 25 years, they're all negative, almost all. And because there's a consciousness about these major brand name products, if it had lead, it would likely have been recalled. So that's another reason that these are a nice, safe toy. The problem comes with the wheels. Some of these older ones have rubberized wheels, and the wheels can have lead. So if this one has the hard plastic wheels, it's not likely to have lead. And if you have one that has rubber wheels that come off, then those are also a choking hazard and are more likely to have lead, and you should consider taking them away, especially from little kids. The fun thing about these is when you test these with an XRF that's designed for testing consumer goods, the paint on these actually tests positive for gold.
Oh.
And the reason is...
Let me start clicking.
Yeah. I tested something like this recently that had like 24,000 parts per million gold.
Wow.
And I think the reason they had used lead paint on metal toys in the past, like the really old ones, like 100 years old, a lot of those are going to have lead, but those aren't the ones you're going to see with kids today usually. You'll see, I have some examples on my blog, but you know, they don't usually have the wheels left or any of the parts left.
Right.
And so by adding lead to the paint, it would stick to the metal of the toy, and I think that's why they add a little gold to the paint to make it stick to the toy. It might have something to do with the iridescence too. So I don't ever have concerns about Matchbox stars. So that's good to know, right? Guys, they're cheap. I love them because they're so inexpensive. You can buy them sometimes for 50 cents each in like a bulk pack, and they're good. I used to give them to my son for potty training instead of like candy or something. Like,
Now, I have a question for.
Can you come in front of the camera?
Sorry.
It's okay. I feel it's so awkward. Yeah, that's good.
So I've noticed like you get type of like Hot Wheelie type toys in like Happy Meals or like fast food type of boxes for like the kitty ones. Do those have any?
so the McDonald's Happy Meals and the Burger King ones, all the new ones, especially post. Well, the great thing about those is because they're considered collector's items. Because there's people out there collecting those things. They're all marked with the date.
Yeah.
Which is different. The Hot Wheels cars are often marked with an old date. Like they're marked with the date of the car or the date they copyrighted the design of the toy.
Okay.
And they aren't necessarily the date of manufacture.
Okay.
But with the Happy Meals toys, they're always marked with the date of manufacture.
Okay.
And so that tells you right off the bat, is it post 2008? And because some of the recalls involved McDonald's products, that is really good because McDonald's knows what the liability concerns are and is less likely to produce a toxic toy. So, and you can look things up online if there was a McDonald's recall. That's just talking about, probability. And there always are exceptions, and there's always the thing that ends up being recalled. You never know what that's going to be.
I feel like I'm an expert.
But in general, does that have rubber wheels?
It's like, it feels rubbery. It's like a bendy plastic.
Yeah. She's looking at a little tractor. So, and I hope this is recording. I don't know. Let's see, we got two people. Can the people who are watching it comment for us so we can see your comments to know if you can hear us okay? That would be really great. We haven't gotten any comments yet.
We got one like.
Yeah, we got one like and 2 watchers here. And anyway, so if someone can comment, we'll keep an eye on that. So because of the dating and because it's a brand name, so I also like along the same lines, I tell people things that are branded and made for Target and for Walmart and Kmart, any of those big companies that are modern are much less likely because if they mess up,
that's the whole
business. They have a
Essentially,
huge financial liability because they're responsible for recall. For example, I don't know if you saw, just a couple weeks ago, there was a Target recall for a squirt gun. And an interesting thing, it's a super soaker, like giant, and the lead was in the label, in a sticker. And that's really unusual, but not unexpected because it's really rare for there to be lead in the plastic. And so if there was a component with lead, it would be something, usually something that's an afterthought, like the labeling or the branding markings. And so that's a good question. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
So will you stay here because you're cute.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So is this cool or what?
That's pretty.
It's pretty. It's from, I think it's probably from the 70s.
Yep.
And I came across this. This is an interesting example of hard plastic, really dense.
Yeah.
And it's really high lead, and the lead varies by color.
Okay.
So this was also in the 4,000 to 5,000 parts per million range for lead. And again, the interesting thing is if you're a mom and you're wearing, I couldn't even put my hand.
And I was like, it's a bracelet. I was like, is it won't pick
I thought it was a slinky at first.
But if you've got this and you're wearing it, it's the kind of thing your kid's gonna chew on. And I also have that concern for purses. Like a lot of purses, purses have brass components that have lead. They have crystal components that have lead. They have leather that has lead in the dye. They have vinyl that has lead in the dye. And so there's all of these concerns for lead in purses. And you're carrying your purse, and then you're carrying your baby, and the baby's chewing on your purse strap, so, or on a key ring. Do you guys have kids? You're so young, so I don't know. But you know what I mean. You remember being if you're carrying that baby and the baby's grabbing your purse, it's not even intended for children, so it's legally allowed to have high lead, even if it's manufactured today. The interesting thing about that is that the expensive purses like Louis Vuitton, and what's the one that Kylie Jenner uses? Is that Louis Vuitton or a different one?
Birkin?
Or is it?
I haven't tested the Birkin. Chanel.
What about Michael Kors?
I tested a couple of those, but I know, so Chanel and Louis Vuitton I tested, and their components test positive for lead and mercury.
Oh, mercury.
Yeah, mercury too, and sometimes cadmium. So the interesting thing is like these really expensive purse brands can test positive for high levels of lead and mercury and other toxicants, and there's no way to regulate that because they're not intended for children. And then again, we've got this thing where the mom's carrying the baby and the baby's chewing on the purse. And the thing that bugged me so much was, do you guys follow the Kardashians at all, or is that
That one does. Me, no.
I follow it just for curiosity.
Yeah,
I just think it's curious.
Yes.
But she bought all little baby
Yes.
bags for her kids.
Oh yes, I
From,
remember.
you know, I don't know, 18 months ago, and I don't think that they were designed as toys. They're just little bags, and then maybe they were designed as toys, but I don't think they were. I mean, they're like $800.
Because they were Louis Vuitton, I remember.
Right.
Because Kylie got them,
See?
it was all of them. I remember that.
But a lot of celebrities are doing that now for their
Their children, they get like matching, instead of matching outfits, they get
like
matching
matching
purses.
bags, but also bags carry like longevity. Like once you
Yeah,
hold
like-
value, like when you get them 20 years from now, they'll cost double than what they did. So I think a lot of people are doing that now.
I guess what the argument is here is just
Yeah.
like it defeats the purpose of putting, like, if you have lead and mercury and all those toxins in those purses, and you're giving them to children, and children don't carry them like adults. They like, oh,
Yeah.
let me taste it. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no. So the fun thing about that is that while the fancy, expensive brands are leaded, the inexpensive ones that you can get at Target and Walmart are generally lead-free.
yes, and
So-
they are my favorite.
Yeah. So it's nice to know that really the accessible brands are okay, and even like the knockoff ones of the fancy brands are also generally lead-free. Not always, but generally. And so the other, I'm just riffing here, but since we're talking about purses real quick, I just want to say that one of the problems with purses, I don't use a purse at all because of this, or normal purse, is because is if you have keys are generally high lead. Do you have a key on you? Any keys? I don't
I
have.
have some.
I had a phone once upon a time.
I have keys in my
Yeah. So what's this? A Saturn.
Saturn.
Okay. So this part, the key is generally between 8 and 11,000 parts per million lead.
Okay.
And so parents are always, oh, you've got some good keys there. That's a key everybody has. Yeah. So this house key type and this key type, Kwikset and Schley and other similar keys. Hey, sweetie, this is my other son, Avi. Are often 8,000 to 11,000 parts per million lead and even higher. And I'll just never forget when my oldest was born and my grandfather was still alive. He had not played with any toys yet. He was about 6 months old. And my grandfather was like, hey, daddy, hey, baby, and like his very first thing that he ever played with was my grandfather's keys. And that's just such a common thing because you have it in your pocket. It's handy.
and it distracts them.
And it's shiny and it makes a noise. And so it's just super important to keep these keys away from children. I was going to say the exception is that a lot of sometimes Japanese cars, not necessarily the Saturn. Is that Japanese? I think it might be.
What's that?
No,
I have no idea.
I think Saturn's a Ford, a version of. It's not.
I don't know.
I would say my dad is real good on getting like American cars.
Okay,
he
yeah.
likes the Lincolns and the Fords.
Those are gonna have lead.
Oh gosh! Oh
I thought we were
no!
complimenting like your dad is good.
No, I was like, that's what he does.
Not new cars, but the old cars. But
Oh, okay.
in terms of the keys, hold on a second. I'm Avi. We're good. We got masks on. We're outside and the air's blowing and he's very cautious. So anyway, so there are alternatives, and you just want to make sure when you give a baby a toy, it's a toy,
Right.
not something that's not a toy.
Okay, so another thing that we do in the chat.
You want to switch?
No,
Okay.
just real quick. You look cute. I don't. But no, so in childcare we do a lot of sensory bottles, and so we take a lot of like Sprite bottles and water bottles, and we put seeds or maybe seashells in them. And I know the kids don't have access to what's inside, but I know there's no lead in the actual bottle because they're bottles that we drunk out. I hope there was no lead in it. But like, is that something we should be concerned about?
Well, as long so I'm assuming when you take a bottle like that and put things in it, you're probably taping the lid on, so you're not getting in it. New plastic beads from Michael's or Joann's should be lead free. Just, I mean, you want to say, okay, well, what's the worst case scenario? Somehow the baby takes the tape off and the lid comes off, right?
Right.
So you want to try and be careful. So but I've tested vintage beads. Like if you went to Goodwill to buy the beads, then those, you don't know the age of the beads, and they could have lead. I tested a bead that someone sent me. A bunch of people have sent me things since the pandemic started where their child swallowed it, and they've sent me. And I've had a mom whose baby swallowed Maraca pellets, and they were solid lead, and the baby's blood level went up right away. Another mom sent me some little plastic beads. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm not real concerned about this little plastic bead. It looks brand new. It looked like, hard new plastic. But it was vintage, and it was like, I think 7,000 parts per million lead.
Wow, just a little bead?
Just a tiny bead had a really lot of lead in it, and it's quite concerning. So that's the problem. So if you're going to make those sensory things, try and choose things that are lead free just in case there's a product failure, for example. In terms of seashells, I've tested a bunch of seashells on my blog. I don't know if you've seen my blog or the seashell test. I was really surprised about the high levels of cadmium and other toxicants in mussel shells and some other shells. But if you're putting like snail shells in there or something, I don't have a big problem with that, especially if it's a contained.
I want to say it's like the arts and crafts shells like you get from Michael's or something.
Yeah, I would, I'm all about buying less, and I would go with putting some beans in there. Or,
we do have beans. We have white northern beans.
There's so many different colors of beans. There's green beans, white beans, red beans, black beans. It can be really colorful, and put some yellow lentils and green lentils in there, and it'd be a fun toy, and also not
toxic.
No risk.
Of possibility of.
So what other things do you have here?
I can say this is a toy from my childhood.
Yeah, and
my niece actually plays with that.
And how old are you?
I'm 25.
Okay.
Somebody commented.
Oh, somebody commented.
It sounds fine.
Oh, that's my husband.
Oh.
That's my husband.
Oh, I didn't look at his name.
So.
Ayana, I would like you to move a little bit further away because the wind was blowing this way.
Oh.
Just so you're not like right upwind.
Oh,
Maybe
gotcha.
go back a little bit.
Okay.
So if
I want to take
sort
like
of
that
staggered.
towards
Yeah. Oh, that way you're still in the image.
Yeah.
I wonder if we can get.
In the sun a little bit. So
Yeah.
scoot over if you need to.
Okay.
You can maybe even, I don't know how far the audio goes. That if you wanted to sit there in the sun, but no one wants to sit in the sun.
North Carolina.
Yeah. Okay. I'm looking at this. So this is from 2003. So it's really interesting because it looks like a new toy. You're not that old. But it was made before the CPSCIA, the Consumer Safety CPSCIA, the Consumer Safety Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act. I get my alphabet soup confused. And so I have seen things like this. What happens? What is it exactly? It's a music thing, or is
It's
it
a laptop.
That's a little laptop. Neat. So on something like this, I would want to test it, and I'm sorry I can't test it today. And you can't test it with the same kind of XRF that you use for paint testing because we're looking for levels that are 90 parts per million and up. And when you use a paint testing XRF instrument, that only tests down to 1 milligram per centimeter squared, and that's a rough equivalent to 5,000 parts per million. So if a paint instrument says something's negative and it's a consumer good, it means it's below 5,000 parts per million instead of below 90 parts per million. So it's a huge discrepancy. Some paint instruments test down to 0.1 or 0.2 or 0.3, but if you break that out, a 0.1 on a paint grade instrument is only going to be a 500 parts per million, and that's still too high. So if it says, oh, it's negative, it's less than 0.1, it still could be below 0.1 and be 400 parts per million, and that's too much for kids. So on something like this is probably negative, like educated guess, but I would have concerns about the paint or vinyl, whatever's making the letters on each of the keys.
Mm-hmm.
And because if it were heavily used, the kids are touching it, and
It can wear and tear, and then cause the lead dust.
yeah, and it's not even like, the main thing people need to understand is that we're talking about invisible microdust. So you won't notice the wear until after it's worn,
Right.
and that's when it's been worn onto your fingers. There have been a lot of Barbie products that have been positive, but the good news is I've tested a lot of Barbies from the 80s and 90s that were fine. The Barbies that I've tested that were positive were more from the 70s. And again, it's just whether or not in this particular product, you can feel how sticky the vinyl is kind of here.
Yeah.
And it's the sticky, it's that sticky vinyl that might be leaded, and the lettering. And rarely the plastic in pinks and whites. The plastic again are the yellows. Want to hand me the little guy there? So and again, we have the same question about batteries on that. So,
Oh yeah.
So this is
There's
a little
back to it.
all right, you've got
Is that a DIY cover? It's a DIY cover. Yes.
So like this little guy, again, not marked, no idea of the age, Lego guy, and he was, I can't remember his exact levels, but he was really high. I think between 7 and 10,000 parts per million. Primarily though in the red cap and the yellow head.
So it's red and yellow that has more of the positive.
With the vintage plastics, it's generally. But getting back to the newer toys too, I tested, I think it was from it was a 2007 book. It was a book that kind of is reminiscent. That was a book that had a hard plastic component with a xylophone or like piano thing in the book. And it was like 50,000, 60,000, 70,000 parts per million lead, because it was before the CPSIA legislation. And even though it was a toy, it wasn't, and even though books are generally considered safe post 1980, it had this integrated electronic component or musical component that was painted metal. So anytime there's painted metal or painted plastic and it's from before 2007, it's definitely a concern. And before 2011, it may be a concern. And one other thing about Legos, I like I said, I kind of rip on things. But, and Len, if you're still watching, ask questions. The Legos, unfortunately, aren't marked, and they just started this program where they're rehoming Legos. So if you don't want your Legos anymore, you send them into Lego, and then they'll like package them up and send them to a low-income community.
Oh,
and I haven't yet written that blog post, but it's like, what are you doing? Are you crazy? What's wrong with you people? You know?
Right.
Because they even can't tell necessarily what years of manufacture, and without testing every single Lego that comes in, they can't know if they're redistributing a toxic Lego or not. Wow. So it's very frustrating. So again, especially when you've got a daycare, I know budgets are hard, but I think when you're talking about children, you can easily make an appeal for people to buy new products, especially around Christmas time. You know, where you can say, we're having a toy drive for the daycare, we're getting rid of any hand-me-downs, make sure not to accept any hand-me-downs, and get new plastic products. They're still plastic, which is bad for other reasons, but the newer plastic is going to be better from a heavy metal perspective.
Right.
And it's also more likely to be marked with the year of manufacture or with current logo configurations where the company can identify the year of manufacture, so you can know that it's safe even later. What else you got there? Oh, that's a good one to look at. This. Yeah. It's newer though, right?
I couldn't find the year on it.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Can't find the year. And I don't see any brand marking on it either. So this could be like an Amazon knockoff, no brand. So that's suspect. And this kind of rubbery thing, the eyeballs are often lead paint, and the mouth is often lead paint. So I have more concern about the face and the painted than the hard plastic. But a lot of people don't think about, like, this is paint.
Right.
The spots are paint. And sometimes with a multicolored toy, you can't tell if it's paint or not. And it seems like it's part of the plastic. But here you can feel that. You can feel the, well, just rub your finger on the, you feel that.
Yeah, like you can feel the texture.
Oh, yeah, and so you know it's paint. So it's this is probably lead-free, probably safe, especially given the hard plastic. But because it isn't marked with a brand, we don't know the country of origin, it doesn't have a date, it's definitely suspect. But I would expect, I mean, educated guess that it would test lead-free. And then the only problem is if this was leaded, the concern would be, can a child put it in their mouth? Well, it's too big for a kid to put in their mouth.
You'd be surprised.
Well, and you know, but kids will do anything and try anything. So if it was your toy and your child were playing with it and you can monitor their behavior, I wouldn't have too much of a concern. But if it's in a daycare setting and you can't know what, you know, you're not going to be eyes on every kid every second.
Right.
Even though it's maybe child safe from a choking perspective, I would have concerns about that. And then, on these little plastic beads inside, I test things like that all the time that are positive for lead.
So, wow, you have lead inside the toy.
Yeah, if it came apart. But this doesn't seem like it's coming apart. I mean, it's well constructed. If anything else, it's got screws holding it together. A lot of parents ask me if the screws and bits like that have lead, and they don't usually. It's really rare, because they're usually stainless steel or iron, you know, and they're lead-free. What else you got over there? You got a couple of little things.
I had like a Barbie shoe.
Yeah, that's a good thing to ask about. So this is really a good example of the kind of plastic that can be positive for lead. I'm asking you to switch it. You're my
thin.
Well, you're my Vanna White. So this looks like it's newer. I might be wrong. But just because of the, I don't know, this could be old. Do you know how old it is, or?
No. It was on one of my Barbies, but I know she didn't have these shoes.
Okay, is that a Bratz? That's a Bratz.
It's
Barbie,
my scene doll.
Okay,
It's old.
So let's talk about the whole thing here. So on something like this, I haven't tested this exact doll, but if I come across it, I'll try and test it and let you know.
That's Madison.
That's the doll has a name.
Yes,
Okay.
Madison.
Okay. So with the rubbery boots and things, and also more importantly with the rubbery legs, the legs that bend like this, that have this tacky rubbery feel, that's what usually tests positive for lead. And that's what kids chew on. Yeah. I have seen so many of these that have bite marks. And then the arms are different and the body's different. There's like there's 4 types of plastic. Okay, you're Vanna. There you go. Feel the different 4, feel how they're all a little different. Yeah. Those are tacky. Those aren't quite the same.
And they're not as flexible.
Yeah, and then her body is a different kind of plastic. That's hard plastic.
And her face is squishy.
And her face is really squishy. So the legs are more likely to be leaded, and same with vintage boots and things like this. Because what they did was they would use the lead as part of the manufacturing process is like a bath to make the material supple so that they can form what they need to make, you know, plastics or rubber items. The main example that I have of this, besides Barbie legs, and again, not all Barbie legs, like this one's probably fine.
Right.
But what I've seen is a good example is Christmas lights. So the cords of Christmas lights, and I just reposted today my Christmas light post of people take pictures of their baby wrapped in Christmas lights, and they take pictures of the baby holding the Christmas lights,
and they're chewing on them, and yeah, now we see.
Yeah, and so that coating on the Christmas lights is sometimes 15,000 to 20,000 parts per million lead, and if it's not leaded, unfortunately, when they get rid of one bad thing, they replace it with another bad thing. We know this, right? So across the board. So the new Christmas lights that are plug-in lights have antimony, which is also known to cause cancer in rats. So instead of lead, they replaced it with antimony as a fire retardant chemical. And so when you have a soft plastic, always be suspicious, because if it doesn't have lead, it might have high levels of antimony. The interesting thing is the International Antimony Association has basically said that there is no concern for human impact. And the main reason for that is that they haven't done the studies. And I'm finding antimony in your stuffed animals, your beanie babies, like the squishy heads. Like, yeah, that's here. And we'll make a transition there. So, well, one other thing about the doll. Let me actually finish about the doll. So with this doll, if we're older, and I mean like 70s or 60s, the eyes and the makeup and the lips and maybe the earrings might be positive. But because of the age of this particular doll, I don't have that concern.
I do have a quick question.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Barbie made me think about it. So like rubber duckies and like bath toys, like the texture of the Barbie kind of reminded me of that. Is that the same kind of like principles that go along with the Barbie with like the paint on the?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the rubber duckies. So my kids were poisoned in 2005,
Mhm.
and I started doing a deep dive into all of this in 2007, and around 2007, 2008. There's another advocate. Her name is Letty. She goes by Letty Gaga, and she dresses up in funny costumes that are lead related. And her name's Leanne, and she's in New Jersey. And she had collected some rubber duckies, and then there was another advocate who had collected a huge collection of toxic rubber duckies, all positive for lead. The interesting thing is the pressure from parent groups on that, and also, so I guess to some degree, the CPSIA and other factors made it so rubber duckies now are generally lead free.
Okay.
New ones, but older ones are generally very high lead, both in the painted elements and in the rubber of the ducky. So
And those toys are passed down. That's why.
yeah, they last forever.
Yeah.
That's
why
the
I was
problem.
asking, yeah.
And hopefully, so if you have a rubber ducky and it doesn't have a year on the bottom, or you don't know where you bought it, it's probably suspicious and you shouldn't hold on to it. And they put them in their mouths, babies put them in their mouths. The nice thing is, again, that it's a theme through a lot of my recommendations, is that newer toys, like if you bought some rubber duckies at the dollar store,
That was my next question. Dollar store toys.
Yeah.
they're generally lead free.
Oh, okay.
They have had recalls. There are problems. Most manufacturers, there are recalls across the board, but because the dollar store had a bunch of toy recalls, they're much more likely now to have lead-free or lead-safe products. So yes, there might be one or two products that are concerned, but it's kind of a nice thing that's come out of all the recalls, is that the dollar store products, at least the ones made for children, are more likely to be lead-free. And so rubber duckies you can get at the dollar store and things like that. The exception was I tested some marbles from the dollar store. Marbles seem to be an exception across the board. It's really hard to find lead-free marbles. And I wouldn't trust all products at the dollar store to be lead-free. Just the children's products would be more likely than you would expect. And the other really interesting thing about that is that everyone thinks, oh, made in China is bad. But when it comes to toys mass manufactured for children through a major brand like the dollar store, they're generally made in China isn't a bad thing. If you're buying on Amazon or Wish, and you're buying something made in China that gets shipped to you direct from China, it can be bad. Hey, monkey, my kid, huh? What do you want to see? You can't have my phone. They're using it for the thing. You go have your iPad. Sorry, my son's interrupting. Hey, come say hi. Come here, say hi so they know why I'm distracted. Look in the camera.
Oh, it's the way. So
He's like, I'll see myself. You'll pop up after you leave.
yeah.
I don't.
All right, go with your brother.
There he goes.
That's my 12-year-old. Let's see, we got a question here. My favorite toy is the telephone. The eyes move up and down. When I was born in 1964, with the older toy that you may find in a thrift stores or an antique shop that you can
I think I
repaint
know
them.
which one. It like had blue eyelids,
Yeah.
and like a red phone.
Okay, so on the telephones,
Was it in Toy Story?
yeah.
Okay, I was like, what's
yeah,
in Toy Story?
yeah. So with those older telephone toys, and also they have like a little pole duck, like on a string, and there's some other things in that line of toys.
Are you talking about like the wooden ones that like kind of were like slinky, or are you just talking about the duck that had like wheels?
I think with the telephone, it's a Fisher Price toy, and I think they had a duck that maybe had a wooden body originally, plastic wheels, and the key point is this, the connecting cable is in the duck, it's usually yellow, and in the telephone, it's either yellow or red, and it's the thing that holds the earpiece, on. And that telephone is generally lead-free except for two plastic components. So the plastic handpiece, if it's red, can be high lead, and the yellow cable, which seems innocuous, it's just like a string, but it's made of plastic and it can be really, really high lead, both because it's yellow and it's a supple plastic from the 60s. So in terms of repainting it to be safe, you can't. And you can now buy those toys, those plastic Fisher Price toys that look just like the ones from 1964, but they've got this reissued, like vintage inspired new line, and it's like a replica of the 1960 toy, and it's completely lead free. They're kind of expensive. I think they're like $20 to $25, which is more than they, should be. But they're because they're playing on, my mom had that or my grandma had that. So yeah, that's I would never. There's no way to make a vintage toy safe with a coating or anything unless you're just displaying it on the shelf. So anyway, and the rubber ducky, back to that real quick, was it's like this, and it's this kind of rubber that's can be painted, but the new rubber ducky should be fine.
Okay.
All right, getting back to this guy. Let me just see. These are amazing because again, this is I think a McDonald's one, right? I can't see. Marketing. It looks like one of the McDonald's. Yeah, this is a McDonald's one. It says McDonald's on it. So the interesting thing is it's got pellets in it, and you can feel them because of beanbag. And some of the Beanie Babies have just pellets in their bottom, so they sit. And so when you test the pellet area, it's negative for toxicants. But when you test the part with the stuffing, it tests positive for antimony, not lead. And again, antimony is a fire retardant. Are you guys aware of how toxic fire retardants are in furniture and all that? Are you that part? You're just lead focused.
Yeah.
So again, the main example of that is they used to have lead in all electrical cords for your lamps or your hair dryer or your waffle iron. Now they've replaced that with antimony. So it's just as toxic. It just hasn't been well studied. And so there's antimony in the stuffing, in the polyfill, like the filling of a blanket. And it's also in any spun plastic fabric. So we find antimony quite often. And the problem is it's low level. It's between 1 and 300 parts per million antimony. And there's no study showing that it's unsafe. And that's just because no studies have been done. So it doesn't mean it's safe.
Right.
And the problem with something like this, if it has antimony in the head and a baby's snuggling and chewing on it, I have concerns. Even though it doesn't have lead, it has other potential issues. So I would definitely, I have recently decided that I'm keeping these kinds of things away from young children. What's the biggest problem I have with this is you got snugglies like your teddy bears and stuff.
Or like the pacifiers that have like that have them in.
The pacifiers that have these on them, this part has antimony. It does, and nobody's looking at it, and it's not regulated.
I gotta tell Tessa she can't have her pacifier no more.
Well, just a pacifier. What you do is, I mean, it's hard sometimes to find the time, but you could make a little stuffed animal to go on a pacifier out of natural cotton and stuff it with natural wool, and they have those things at Joann's and Michael's. You don't. And just don't buy the polyfill, and try and buy natural, especially anything you're giving to a baby whenever possible. Try and buy something with natural fibers, or don't buy it. Limit what they have.
I wasn't sure which one I wanted. Which one?
I want to do the train.
Yeah, the train. Well,
the Easter egg, that's definitely a big one.
That didn't have a date on it.
This doesn't have a date on it.
But it looks old.
They said it was made in China though.
Yeah, it says made in China. It says ages 3+, which is just a choking hazard, and it's branded, but it's an off-brand. It's not like it's not Brio or anything like that. So because it's an off-brand and it doesn't have an age, I would want to test something like that. Now, in terms of what are good options, so especially because it's yellow and red and off-brand and made in China, if it was new and Brio and was red and yellow, I wouldn't have any problem. And those are really expensive, like $20 each. But an interesting thing is I have one that's red and yellow from made in Sweden on my blog that I think is also a Brio, and I think it's a Brio, and it tested really high lead. But what I tell people to do if they want to be 100% sure that their trains like this are safe, I want to make it show the camera closely, is that the ones that from IKEA are really cheap for a set of trains and tracks, and they're lead free. Also, anything new you bought, say from Target, that's an off-brand that doesn't have to be a Thomas set, would be lead free. Again, since we don't know the country of origin, I bet you if you could scan the barcode, you could find out where it came from. So I don't think that's going to be leaded. I don't have a huge concern about it, but it's a little suspicious because it has all those considerations. This is kind of the same thing, right? Same
Yeah, it's
kind of,
just a different color.
yeah. So, but the wooden trains, since the recall of the Thomas product in 2007, I don't think there have been any that have been positive for lead. So if this were that old, it would, that's a long time ago now, 2007,
Right.
13 years ago. So if this were that old, it would be chipped, and it's not. Well, this one's chipped. So that's a good reason to be concerned. But it's also very unlikely to be leaded, just because the wooden ones aren't leaded. And also the little metal ones aren't leaded. They have a metal versions of these.
Right. Okay.
Those are always negative.
This is a Doug and Melissa toy.
Oh, Melissa and Doug. Okay, that's
Melissa and Doug. There we go.
Yeah. So Melissa and Doug, I love the brand. Actually, it's a good brand. There's some myths on the internet. There's lots of myths on the internet, right? And one of the myths is that Melissa and Doug is toxic and not safe. But there was a recall years ago from Melissa and Doug, and they had a barium recall in Canada, because Canada has barium standards. The United States doesn't. The United States has very few standards. We have standards for cadmium and for lead. So the nice thing about Melissa and Doug is I've never, in my 10 years of doing consumer goods tested, never once have tested a Melissa and Doug product that was positive for lead. That's pretty good there. And then this is a really good example where the decorative element is a applique. It's like paper. You can't tell really from touching it, but there's no. It's flat, so it's not paint. And in most cases, that's an indicator that it's not likely to be leaded, with the exception being the super soaker that we talked about earlier. Someone's sending me one of those to test. I can't wait to find out. Ooh, look, it's a murder hornet. No, it's a really big bug. Oh my God. She ran away.
That's a normal hornet. You're in North Carolina. But I will blow them away.
Do we need to worry about that?
I wasn't on camera. Trying to stay.
He's confused.
He's confused.
He's trying to find his home. He's in the wrong place. Oh my God.
Woo, there we go. So I don't have any concern for Melissa and Doug products. I think that they're all safe. Green Toys is another great brand. The thing I love about Green Toys for daycare centers, how many kids are in your daycare, by the way?
Currently right now we have about 40. Just because of COVID. Before that, it was a little over 80.
Oh, wow.
So we have like half of that. And my classroom personally only have 5.
Wow. And how old are your kids?
They're infants, so they're from 10 months to 12.
Okay. Well, so Melissa and Doug is a good brand. The paper line, the paper decorative elements do come off if they get mouthed, but they're not toxic. But Green Toys is really great because they last forever. I don't know if do you have any Green Toys?
I've never heard of that brand.
They make their toys out of recycled milk jugs, and they're just super durable.
Do they make giraffes? Is it like a?
No, they have all kinds of things. They have trucks and tea sets and.
Because I know one. I can't think of the brand, but they made like the only animal that I saw, toy that I saw was always this rubber giraffe.
Oh, that's Sophie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I was like, the kids like that one, but I was also told that was made out of recycled goods as well.
I don't know. Sophie, I thought there was a natural rubber, but I'm not sure. The one thing I know about Sophie doesn't have lead, but Sophie has a mold problem.
Oh.
It has like a vent on the bottom, and the babies chew on it, and like.
Yeah. A lot of the toys in the infant room have like the little holes, so when you do, because we have to wash and sanitize them, so the water gets stuck in it, and then like the water drains out, but the little bits of water start to grow mold within the toy.
That's a horrible problem. So
yeah,
I know a lot of people have Sophie, and I don't encourage Sophie. but a lot of babies really like Sophie. Let's see. I don't know if we have any other comments here. No more comments. Anybody has any comments?
I have a comment.
Yeah, sure.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I have a 4-month-old granddaughter.
Okay.
And
I have been buying. Okay.
Wait, can you come closer to the microphone so people can hear you? If you want to switch places,
This chair here?
or why don't we switch places and be on camera?
It's your time to shine.
Yeah.
I have. I have a 4-month-old granddaughter, and I have been buying. We've been buying her stuff from the Learning Express, but I also been buying her stuff from Amazon, like those crinkle, for sensory.
Yeah.
The crinkle,
I know what you're talking about, the crinkle
yeah,
bracelets. So, yeah.
Is that safe? It never occurred to me.
So there's a couple different things, but a lot of the crinkle toys have a little bit of padding in them. So they have like a crinkly plastic, but in but there's a fabric, and then there's a little bit of stuffing too.
Right.
And those don't have lead usually, but they can have antimony. And so I do have concerns about those as not an ideal toy for a kid. I remember though, the kids love them. The kids absolutely love them.
And the socks that you pull up, and it's for children. It's just funny looking socks with some kind of
I haven't seen the socks. I don't know.
noise maker.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So any of the toys, even the baby toys that have wait, now I'm the only one on camera. That's no fair. I need my Vanna White back, or somebody, anybody. Come closer. You can closer, but behind. Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that
You
work?
can stay up front,
Okay.
and I'll be behind you.
So the problem with, and again, this is outside of the realm of lead, but in an area of concern, is the plastics and the chemicals in the plastic. And what I do in my advocacy work is I do consumer goods testing, and I test for lead, cadmium, mercury, arsenic, and antimony. Those are the ones I look for. I also kind of look at cobalt and barium just as a curiosity. I haven't heard of anybody being poisoned from that, but I see that as a concern. So I definitely discourage people from buying those mass manufactured things, and especially discourage you from buying it direct from China on Amazon. I think that's the best advice. Like, try and only, if you're going to buy those,
Get it from Learning Express at all.
get them directly from a brand that you know and trust, that you know that where the manufacturers, because there's a lot of fraud in toy production and any kind of consumer good production. Like those Yeti cups. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Don't say that.
No.
I was like, I have to. I was like, I love Yeti. I love Target. No, but it's at Target. Target's good.
No. But let's say, so somebody sent me. So the Yeti cups cost like $80. So the Yeti cups are fine. The real ones are fine. But someone sent me a Yeti cup that looked exactly like a real one. I swear to you, I could not tell the difference. It even had the sticker inside that the new ones come with. It had the paperwork inside. It had the lid. It had all the components. It looked exactly like a Yeti cup, and it was painted with lead paint. So it was a bright red one, and I believe the level was in the 80,000 parts per million or 70,000 parts per million. I can't remember. It might not have been that. It might have been closer to 20. But so when you buy something from Amazon and you're not buying it from a known vendor, you don't know what you're gonna get. It's just the way it is.
So so we bought her, those I think they're actually wooden beads, that when she gets a little older, she'll be able to manipulate. And we purchased that from the Learning Express. Are their toys usually safe?
I haven't tested a lot of toys on them, but everything I have tested from them has been safe. So I don't have a concern for their toys. That's kind of like an Avon thing, or is it in general? Does they have like sub vendors that are local community vendors for the Learning Express?
We went to the Cary one, and we purchased, no, not Cary, it was rather.
So they have a store.
Cary.
They have a.
Yes, it's a store.
Okay, yeah, I don't have a concern with those. I think that's a good.
But don't purchase anything from Amazon.
I wouldn't purchase it from Amazon. When you go to Amazon to buy something, you get a message that tells you, like if you look under, it tells you what the vendor is. So you can buy a product that is, for example, Duralex glassware, and then you look what the vendor is. And if the vendor's Duralex, then you know you're getting the real product. If the vendor is not Duralex, you don't know if you're getting the real. So you look, make sure the vendor is consistent with the name of the product. Double check that when you buy things on Amazon, because there's just too much opportunity for stuff to go wrong.
Now, I purchased recently one of those elephant things that actually, you know, you attach wheels to it, and it just kind of like, and it's like a plush animal that has a seat within it. And I mean, is that safe?
Those are going to be lead-free, cadmium-free, mercury-free, and arsenic-free. But the plush animals that are ride-on are going to have antimony, and again, in the 100 to 300 range. Now, the thing is, I'm talking about, like, it's not something that's a concern by any standards right now. But a lot of times in the work I've been doing is I'll find a problem, and I'll think, oh, this might be a problem. And then 5 years later, a scientist will do a study and say, oh, this is a problem. So that's my concern, is this.
That was also purchased through Amazon.
Yeah, so if your baby's not mouthing stuffed animals, I don't have a concern. If the baby is mouthing stuffed animals, it's better to give them fewer products like that are made of natural fibers, and find other things for them to play with than the stuffed animals, because it's just something that's not being looked at right now by our government agencies. And so there's concerns that aren't being addressed. So the reason I have this concern is I went to visit a family where a little boy was nonverbal, and he tested positive. He did a urine test, I believe, and he tested positive for really high levels of antimony in his urine. And he also tested positive for lead. And we found antimony in his couch, in his bed, in his pajamas, in his pillows, in his blankets, and his stuffed animals. And it's just like in everything. So I just had this one experience with this profoundly disabled child who was off the charts for antimony. And that's usually from a flame retardant mattress. That's like the main culprit, because the antimony levels in a flame retardant containing mattress can be between 1,000 parts per million and 10,000 parts per million. But they're not lead. But you know, it's not just lead. You know.
But what about their clothes? You brought up the question of pajamas and.
So always buy flame retardant free clothes. Never buy those clothes that come with flame retardants if you can avoid the flame retardants. And always, whenever possible, buy natural fibers. And it's amazing, like Walmart sells organic cotton baby clothes.
Yes, they do.
You know,
are those okay?
Those are great. And any chance you have to buy, you know, organic cotton inexpensively, go for it. And if you can't afford the organic cotton ones, go with just the cotton ones. Just try and avoid the synthetics. The only thing my only compromise on synthetics, and this is because you have to make some compromises, you can't be worried all the time, right? Is, you know, you gotta, if your kids are into superheroes and you need to get a costume for them, they're not gonna come in natural fibers. So if you need to buy a Superman outfit, you might need to be synthetic, and you try and make sure your kid's not sleeping in it every night. But you know, just make that be the exception and not the rule.
What about jackets, like winter jackets, North Face?
Yeah, the jackets tend to be okay. It depends on what the filling is. It really depends on what the filling is. They don't have lead, and the clothes don't tend to have lead like the like there was a recall a while ago. I believe it was Old Navy had some. I don't know. We all have now the clothes where the label is printed on the inside. You know, it doesn't have. It's not a tag really anymore. And when that technology first came out, the labels on some, I believe it was Old Navy. I'm not 100% sure if it was Gap or Old Navy, but those labels had lead paint, and so then they had a recall. But that's not the case anymore. So again, another reason to avoid hand-me-down clothes for babies. I've also, when I first did my XRF training, learning how to use the instrument, someone brought in a shirt for a little girl, a baby shirt, that was covered with a heart with crystals. It was leaded crystal, like all over the shirt. And then I've also tested vinyl on shirts. Is your shirt vinyl? Can you feel the print? I don't know.
It's a little texture.
Yeah, so I tested shirts with vinyl like that. where the vinyl was positive, but not recently. So recently, you're much more likely to not have lead in the vinyl on shirts and not have lead in the crystals. They've gotten with the program on that. So it's just if you get hand-me-downs. It's hard to avoid shopping at Goodwill and other things when either you're on a budget or, you know, hey, it's fun to search for things.
Yeah.
Thrifting.
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 We drove by on the way here. I said to my son, "Oh my God, there's this giant, you know, antique mall in Virginia. Wouldn't that be really interesting to check out?" And my son's like, "No way, Mom, you're not going in there." So it's hard to stay away from those things. But when you're talking about things your children might be exposed to, speaking of which, so we're talking about vintage toys. And you're not vintage. You're not, well, you are vintage. 24, 25 is vintage. But a lot of the moms that I work with, they're in their 30s, like 30 to 35. And their toys tend to not have antimony in the stuffed animals, which is interesting. It's a new thing. But the dolls, if they have button eyes or painted eyes, like Cabbage Patch Kids dolls, not all of them, but some of them, the eyeballs can be leaded, and any buttons down the shirt can be leaded. I just recently tested American Girl dolls. They are great products. They are almost completely non-toxic, really good product, except the buttons on some of the vintage outfits. And the buttons are a choking hazard. And the mom that I was talking to about this, she said, "Well, I'm not going to let my little baby play with the, you know, the vintage American Girl doll anyway. It's going to be from when she's older." So, you know, you have to weigh, you know, is your baby going to swallow that? Is it potentially, does your kid put things in their mouth? And that, you know, that you can have a kid of any age that may or may not put something in their mouth. Like my 18-year-old still puts things in his mouth. He has a habit of chewing on things, you know. So you know, you just have to kind of evaluate that from kid to kid in terms of the vintage things. So the vintage things can be safer in terms of the plush elements. But why don't you hand me that harmonica? So this came up in my travels recently, and these are everywhere, and they should be safe for children.
Move the camera, so that's kind of a small item.
Oh, you want me to give it a close up? Yeah. So what I usually find is that these little pieces here on the end, little metal bits, have mercury or cadmium. And this is let me just say the brand on this. It's almost invisible, but I'll be posting about this on my blog. It's a Honor, Hohner. And then you think that that's the only bit of metal, but actually there's a metal plate under the whole thing that creates the panel that makes it a harmonica. And so even though you can't see it, it's sandwiched next to where the kid's mouth goes. So this, I tell people, oh, these never have lead. They just have mercury and arsenic. Well, this one had lead, 500 parts per million in the metal components. And you have to decide, well, are they putting it in their mouth? Yes, by design, they're putting it in their mouth. Is it enough to poison a child? It's hard to say, probably not. Is it above what's considered safe for a child's toy? Yes. The problem is, there's a regulatory loophole with some of these things. They're supposed to look at each component and test it separately in order for to have CPSC compliance. So because this is a separate component, I have to be below 100 parts per million. But on some of these items, they're not seeing that as a separate component. They're not testing it separately. The main item, I don't have one of these with me, I wish I did, is the baby bottles, the Nuck glass baby bottles.
Even the patches?
Wow.
Just the glass, just the bottles.
Just the bottles.
So the glass baby bottles, I tested one as recently as 2018, and there's several brands. The Green Sprouts glass baby bottles, Nuck. There's a brand from Denmark, Havia, where these bottles cost $20 each. They're made of glass. People are buying them because they think it's a safer choice for their child, and they're painted with lead paint in the logo markings. And the CPSC says, so far, they've said that they consider this not to be a problem because if they grind up the whole baby bottle, it's a minor component. But the thing is, your baby's touching the outside of that bottle where the lead paint is. They're actually holding it. And and I'm very frustrated that there haven't been any recalls initiated. I found, I think, 4 different brands, Jervis and George. I don't know if people send baby food in to your child care center with their baby in glass bottle jars at all, but they have these reusable, they're called Jervis and George baby food containers, and they're glass and they're painted with lead paint also. And so the frustrating thing is that the CPSC initiated a recall for a Super Soaker toy where the label on the outside was lead painted, had a lead ink label, but baby bottles with the same problem, and it's even a more significant problem, aren't being recalled. So there's all sorts of loopholes and people overlooking things and federal agencies being overwhelmed. So unfortunately, we have to be the ones looking out for our kids on all these things. And you have to make informed choices. And so I don't know the answer. I don't have an answer for Harmonica, but it's you have to decide. It's probably not going to poison the kid, but it's above what's considered safe.
Wow, I have never. The bottles, I mean.
The baby bottles infuriates
Yeah.
me.
That's terrible.
That's horrendous.
Yeah, it's really, really terrible. Let's see these eggs.
Oh my gosh. Easter eggs also.
No, they're fine.
Oh, good.
Whoops.
So this is the not lead eggs.
Yeah.
And these are the lead.
Those are, well, this is lead free.
Yay.
This is a little pile of lead right here.
So we can put that down there so we can take a picture of it. So it's got just these are the not lead.
Not lead. I have, and the reason for, I have never tested one of these that has been positive for lead. I've tested a lot of them because I'm sure one of these days I'll find one that is, because it's mass manufactured, it's not branded, it's not dated. There's just a lot of potential for something like this to be positive for lead. But so far, we've been lucky and haven't found any of these. And the thing that I question is, again, they have these for Spider-Man and for Disney characters and all that stuff. And it's a sticker sometimes it's painted, and that's why I wonder about them, and I have concerns. And maybe they're really on top of it in the industry that's making these, because so far I haven't in my experience found any. The other thing is, there aren't going to be vintage ones of these sitting around usually.
Right.
There can be, but they're not usually. So, and they're hard plastic. They're not really flexible plastic so much. So this is not the kind of plastic that's likely to test positive for lead. You have so many other things in your bag. We didn't go through other things.
They didn't have dates on, but they were mostly like the cars and.
You have the one with the plastic, the tractor. Let's see. We got one question online on Facebook, and.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Do you have other questions?
Well, I mean, I think that my granddaughter does have one of those pacifiers with a flush, some type of little small flush.
Yeah, and there's no evidence that that's causing harm. But I think, if I had a choice as a parent and knowing what I know about the metals that can be found in it, without knowing the brand, I would consider making a natural animal. Like, I don't know if you sew. I know sewing's a lost art, right? But you could get a little natural wool or wool and cotton doll to sew to it, and just a couple of stitches instead of what's on there. I would be more comfortable in that, because you figure if they're potentially ingesting it, so this is a really good. So something like this is definitely going to be negative, with a rare exception. But the wheels are hard plastic. It is painted in the middle, so I think it says Paw Patrol. So Paw Patrol is going to be fairly heavily watched and regulated, and because it's a newer brand. But the interesting thing is, you never know, because this is a sticker, and it's the sticker on the Super Soaker that was just positive.
Right.
It's really rare that the stickers are positive. The only stickers I've tested that were positive for lead were stickers from like 1920. I have them on my blog. I found these, like, somebody gave me these old stickers, and they printed with leaded ink, just like an old book. So in general, I would guess something like this would be negative, unless it was an exception that was subject to recall. Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. So that's another Paw Patrol. You have a Paw Patrol fan in your
Yes,
midst?
yes.
So something like this is sold with candy. So it's it's not regulated, to my knowledge, it's not regulated like a food product, but it's much more likely to not have lead, except obviously the concern is the battery. This is a good example of a plastic item that's painted, where you don't kind of think about that it's paint, and it's kind of tacky feeling, so you'd be suspicious. But I've tested quite a few of these, and they've never been positive. And let's see, is it muted? Can people still hear? It said unmute your speaker. I just wanted to see, or maybe it's fine. If anybody's there, please let us know if you can hear. Just chime in. You got 2 watchers. So this kind of rubber attachment is generally in a new product. This is like silicone, and it's generally going to be lead free. I've rarely tested silicone that was positive for lead, and the ones that I've tested that were positive for lead are KitchenAid rubber spatulas.
Oh.
They're silicone rubber spatulas. There's a couple examples on my blog. There's a yellow one, banana yellow, super high. Again, it's the expensive one that's positive for lead, and the newer version of that in red tested positive for low level of lead. So again, dollar store, Walmart, all good, mostly.
That's amazing.
Rita did say that she could hear.
She said she couldn't hear?
Yeah, I don't know where the microphone is.
You said it's right. It should be right there, yeah.
And the camera. Let's bring the camera.
Is it still plugged in? Whoops. Yeah, well, the camera's plugged in. Yeah, what's this? That's a separate cable. Oh, my husband just said audio is still fine. Thanks, Len. Okay, my husband just said, are you going to talk about the large vintage toys like the car wash, etc.? So you know the Fisher Price houses and the Fisher Price car wash. A lot of those end up in daycare centers too, and those can be really high lead, and again in the plastics, not usually in the stickers. And I don't have a huge concern about them potentially poisoning a child, because a child can't put a house in their mouth.
Right.
But I do have a concern about potential for microdust creation and the little people. I don't know if you guys are so young. You know what I'm talking about. We play with the little people.
I know they look like Cabbage Patch Kids, kind of. They have. I know what they look like.
They little
yeah,
tiny,
like if I saw it, I would be like, oh.
Yeah, they don't have kind of nondescript features.
Right.
But their faces are painted with lead paint, and they're just the size that kids can pop them into their mouth really easily.
Because they usually came like with a school bus or something, and you can.
Yep, yep. So don't those. Yeah, you remember those.
Yes, they were probably in my children's mouth.
Yeah, yeah, and probably in your mouth.
Yeah, we didn't have plastic toys.
Yeah, see, that's fair.
I'm old.
Yeah, I didn't have a lot of plastic toys either. It was really rare for us to have any plastic toys. But those little figurines from the 70s and 80s and 60s too. So they used to make them with wooden bodies and plastic heads, and then they made them with all plastic. So there's a few different versions, and they all test positive for lead in both the plastic and the wood and the faces.
Amazing.
So I don't have as much a concern with the houses and the garages. I have more concern with the pieces that can be ingested or have, or mouthed more easily. So that's that one. Oh, and then let me see that thing. That's cool. So this is a tractor for putting a bunch of Matchbox cars in, and it's pretty inexpensive, pretty like dollar store kind of quality. But it's really unlikely that this would test positive for lead. And this is a good example of the hard plastic tires. And the tires don't come off the wheel. So those are all good things as indicators that it's really unlikely that it's leaded. So just because something's cheap doesn't mean it's unsafe. And this is a great example of that. And even though this is a little bit flexible and the clear almost never is positive. The vintage clear plastics are positive for BPA, which is another set of concerns, endocrine disruptors and stuff. And the vintage Tupperware. I don't know if you have Tupperware at all. I looked at you, not you guys. It's an age thing. Do you have any Tupperware?
Like this?
No, that's that's Pyrex. That's different.
Like
Yeah,
plastic? Oh, okay, yeah.
Like the Ziploc Tupperware?
Like you get from the dollar store,
Yeah, but
or
the heavy duty stuff.
The actual Tupperware brand.
like Ziploc.
Oh, the
Yeah.
actual Tupperware. Okay, yeah.
So there's Tupperware brand and
I thought you were talking about like,
Oh, just.
but I do have the actual Tupperware.
I wish we could have them on film. I love getting all their reactions. It's so good. Their reactions are better than anything else. Look, aha. I want to do a
Grab the camera.
I want to do a reality TV show. Here, yeah. Okay, you wanna? I can hold it a little bit. Let's see. And yeah, so the actual, you're not on camera yet. Let's see, we're waiting for. Oh, there we go. Ooh, wait, there we go. The actual Tupperware brand products and also vintage Rubbermaid test positive for mercury, lead, cadmium, and arsenic.
Oh my God.
And they're food products. You know, they're meant for holding and storing food.
People be dying.
Yeah.
And a
And
lot of it's like microwavable.
yes.
So it's like seeps into your food. We just
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, they say microwave safe. That I was just about to say that. That's exactly the problem. Is that they're encouraging people.
To heat my food in there. You trying?
Yeah.
I could have died from arsenic poisoning.
Yeah.
What about the newer plastic containers, you know, that people always use?
Let's see if I'm not gonna see you. Just the newer containers are generally safe. Although, and whenever possible, I encourage getting clear glass.
Like Pyrex?
Yeah, like the Pyrex.
So
So
those are glass on the bottom, the Pyrex.
yeah. You want to? So I brought these came.
You can be Vanna.
You can be Vanna. I brought these.
Oh yeah,
I
it's mostly glass. But
Hopefully it's not broken. I'm hearing like glass moving around in there. But basically, you know, clear glass.
there. Oh, you can see it's plastic tops.
Yeah, the plastic tops I'm not so cool. I'm not happy about. But the clear glass containers are generally safer and healthier and not going to contain any contaminants. The new clear glass Pyrex is not going to have lead, cadmium, mercury, or arsenic, but it may have barium. But generally, the new Pyrex does not have barium. So let's see. I'm trying to get you guys in the picture. There we go. Anyway, so I brought those.
just our poses.
I actually brought those with me from Long Island. I was visiting a family there, and they had an extra set, and I thought I could give them away to somebody here. I don't know if anyone. I was gonna like do a quiz or a question, but you know, whoever wants them, they're yours. I don't know if any one of you needs them. Yay!
Thank you. I'm so excited.
Right, we're holding them up.
That's your payment for being on camera. Were there some other toys that you had questions about?
No, because a lot of them were the cars, like the box cars and Barbie products. So, and a lot of them were newer, from like 2017 and up.
Okay, 2017, it's gonna be fine. Look, you can look on the CPSC. It's not, unfortunately, our government agencies are so taxed that even though they're trying to do their job, they're not going to catch everything. And that's kind of why I do what I do. I do what I do for two reasons. Number one, the concern for lead in consumer goods is not actually significant to the concern for lead in housing.
Right.
The problem is the concern for lead in housing. That's more important. The concern for lead in consumer goods is really secondary. Although it's a great conversation starter, it's a way to get people engaged, especially any of the young mothers who bring their kids to your daycare.
Right.
If we're talking to them about lead, it's hard for them to think about lead in their housing, but they can think, oh, are my dishes safe? And they can look up their dishes on my website. They can look up their, you know, they can call the company and find out if their dishes are okay, or if they know where they bought them. You know, certain brands tend to be fine, like the new Pyrex clear glass, new Libby clear glass. Certain brands are terrible, by the way, for dishes, like Crate and Barrel, Sur La Table, all the
Crate and Barrel.
They're consistently bad, yeah. Mikasa, you know, they're expensive too. And so, you know, if people can find out if their consumer goods are safe, and then they can start the inquiry as to whether or not there's a problem. But then we have the problem of the housing. So maybe this is a good time to make the segue into the housing concerns.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
This might be actually a crazy question, but I know we talked a lot about like ingesting lead and what can happen once it's in your system. But what about, does that have the same effects if it's in contact with your skin too long or things like that?
So that's one of those areas that I feel, based on the reading and research I've done into the science that's available, I feel it's understudied.
Okay.
So if you ask any scientist or doctor or policymaker or anybody in the lead poisoning prevention field, almost, you can chime in on this if you have a different opinion, but if you ask people about that, they're going to tell you that transdermal exposure is not a concern. And I really question that, because there's a few concerns. Are we out of batteries, or?
No, I'm saying,
Oh.
Say transdermal. What does that mean?
Let me break down my transdermal is skin, and trans is transport, so the traveling through skin.
Yay!
Then we got the Tupperware.
Yeah.
Your glass. That's a quick question.
So.
Okay, everyone's going to come to you for SAP.
So the potential for transdermal exposure has been only studied specifically with like leaded gasoline. It's really kind of ironic. The guy who invented leaded gasoline used to say that it was safe, and he would stick his hand in a bowl of leaded gasoline, and he's like, look how safe this is. I can stick my hand in a bowl of leaded gasoline, I'm fine. Well, he got lead poison and died.
Oh.
And my understanding, he died from the ailments.
I'm pretty sure he wasn't drinking.
No, I don't think he was drinking it, so we know that there's potential from that, not just from that anecdote, but we understand that with something where the lead is suspended in gasoline, and that kind of, the tetraethyl lead that's in gasoline, it can have potentially transdermal exposure concerns. But all of the advocates and activists in lead poisoning prevention that I've talked to say, oh, well, we don't have a concern for transdermal exposure from your bathtub. If you have a leaded bathtub, is the hot water in the bathtub or a child's exposure in the bathtub causing the lead from the bathtub to leach into to get into their bodies? And I just don't think that's been studied enough, because I go to homes where bathtubs are 300,000 parts per million lead. I mean,
maybe an issue. Yeah.
Wait.
I have a family that wants me to check.
Yeah. So let's see if you're going to be on camera. I'm waiting for the catch.
Well, I have to wait and talk with the housing authority, because we are in a Durham housing authority community, and set up the visits so they can see what, if there is paint or the coating on the bathtub is coming off.
Well, so here's the thing too, and it's very frustrating, but bathtubs are excluded from the remediation measures that are funded by HUD.
But in North Carolina, it is considered a hazard. So there is a standard for bathtubs, just like for other surfaces.
Oh, nice.
That are coated.
What's the standard?
I think it's the same as the floors, and I think they also do the water. Test the water. So
Okay.
They try to get at it both. Is the lead leaching? Is it being dissolved into the water of the bathtub? And also they check the surface. And I think it's the same standard as lead paint.
So my concern, so lead paint is considered lead paint by HUD and standards if it's over 1 milligram per centimeter squared. So if it's over 5,000 parts per million. Leaded enamel in cast iron bathtubs is 300,000. So it would come up on a typical paint XRF as over 9.9, because 9.9 is the highest reading on most of those.
Okay.
And what I think hasn't been done, and someone can correct me if they have evidence to the contrary, is that it hasn't been, I'm going to shift back over to our audience here. It hasn't been studied with the actual anticipated realistic engagement that a child has with a bathtub. So when I had my third child, I didn't have 4 yet. I have 4 altogether now. But when I only had 3, and I wanted to keep them busy. I would throw them in the bathtub, you know, all three of them, to play together. And we had a big bathtub, and it was an old leaded bathtub. And once I learned how much lead was in it, I got rid of the bathtub because I just wasn't willing to risk that, because it wasn't the bathtub necessarily under normal functional use. It was how I used the bathtub. I would use the bathtub 2 or 3 times a day for fun for the kids. I would say, hey kids, why don't you take a bath and let's put color in it, and let's put water toys in it, and why don't you play for half an hour? And I would like sit on the toilet with my computer and, you know, not on the toilet, but like I would sit next to the bathtub on the toilet as a chair, and I would you know, work while there, or I would fold laundry in the bathroom or whatever. And well, that was my way to keep them engaged when they were little babies. And so I just don't think that there's been enough study given the high levels of lead we find in bathtubs. But there are studies that say, oh, well, there's no concern for a transdermal exposure from lead from bathtubs. Now, so the secondary concern there for me is makeup. So there's several examples of makeup on my blog that I've tested that test positive and fairly high for lead and cadmium, and it's historically been a problem. Now, one could assert that given, you know, we're within the age of COVID-19, we're really present to how often we're touching our face, and, you know, we're maybe are touching our lips, and maybe the lipstick's just, the lead's entering our body from our lips, or maybe the eyeshadow is somehow we're touching our eye and then we're touching our lip and it's getting into our mouth. So one could allege that it's not a transdermal exposure source. But then we've got these kids from India who are using the kohl eyeliner when they're babies. They have some ceremonial things when, and I excuse me for not knowing better what I'm talking about, but there's cultural uses of high lead makeup that looks like eyeliner, like black eyeliner, and those I have concerns for transdermal exposure, and that it's not just the hand-to-mouth activity of the child touching their face and then touching their mouth when the makeup's there. I think there's a potential. I just don't think it's been well studied enough. So, yes.
It just made me think about that when we're talking about clothes and lead being in clothes, because I personally have an issue with nickel, and nickel is in a lot of like zippers and buttons and stuff. So it just made me,
jewelry.
yeah, costume jewelry. So it just made me think about, you know, how, and like keeping it on for too long, like how did that affect, you know, the skin? So.
Yeah, so costume jewelry is a big problem. And again, I don't think anyone studied, are we talking about a hand-to-mouth problem, or are we talking about a transdermal problem? Well, pearls, faux pearls that feel like pearls, they chip, but they're also, they're lead-painted leaded crystal. So it's like they're lead with some lead on top. Right. And so they test positive with a reactive agent test is the lead check swabs, which is a home test kit you can use. If something tests positive with a lead check swab, it really makes me concerned that is likely bioavailable. It's not a definitive scientific answer that it's bioavailable in that way, but it's an indicator that it probably is. So if someone's wearing, you know, a faux pearl necklace that was their grandmother's, and they wear it all the time because, oh, it's, you know, fashionable or makes them remind them of their grandmother, or for example, a leaded crystal. I tested some leaded crystal earrings the other day that were 300,000 parts per million lead. Again, with 90 parts per million being the hazard concern. Uh-oh.
Like, is that a bird? No, it's like a cicada.
So, I have...
That was big. It was, oh, I hope that's on camera.
What about Swarovski crystals?
Yeah, so I can't pronounce that either. Can you guys, how do you pronounce it? Swarovski? We know what we're talking about though, right? We all know what we're talking about. So those crystals are, they used to be really high lead, and now they make lead-free versions, but I think they still make the leaded ones. So you can buy them, either the lead-free or the leaded. I have to confirm that with the company, but I'm often finding those crystals on clothing. You hear about the gowns being made with them, and wedding dresses and things like that. Luckily, those outfits aren't things you're wearing every day, but the problem comes when we've got a kid using them for dress up, you know. And if your kid's going to use them for dress up, and then they might be putting on this leaded crystal gown or holding a leaded crystal purse or touching a leaded crystal earrings, and they do test positive with the reactive agent swab, so we know that there's lead that comes off of them from touching them. And then that kid's eating an apple or eating a Larabar, granola bar, without washing their hands first. And they're potentially ingesting lead microdust. And a lot of advocates in the lead poisoning prevention community might consider me insane for saying that's a risk. But it is when you're talking about total aggregate exposure from consumer goods sources. The bugs are out to get you. But the bigger concern, again, is lead paint in housing. And I'd say, from a consumer good perspective, my main concerns are lead painted baby bottles, because we're still talking about lead paint because it's the microdust. Lead painted vintage Pyrex, which is a problem, and lead painted vintage glassware, like your Coca-Cola glasses where it has the logo on the outside. Lead painted mugs and things where your mug has logo design on the outside, or even brand new, like you see on my blog from last year, Starbucks mugs. High lead, 20,000 parts per million lead.
Oh my God. I collect those. I have like 15 cups. I'm really hurt right now.
Oh,
Sorry for laughing.
well, that just messed up a lot of people's Christmas gifts.
You guys are great. This is why, seriously, I want to do and you're not alone. Like, this is I don't know. We've got 2 people watching still, but hopefully this will be shared. Starbucks mugs, and so
Recording. I forgot to warn you we're recording, but it has a little record button up
yeah,
there.
I know you're recording.
So we're hoping to post it. But
Maybe.
We will need to wrap up at some point and then ask people to come back on Facebook if they want to walk around with us. We have at least one resident who wants us to visit.
Yeah, sure. So the other thing is your reactions, your specific reactions to things like Starbucks mugs and other new concern, your reactions to the baby bottle. This is everybody's reactions, and it's like we're having a crime committed against us that our food consumption items have lead. This is a problem. It's not necessarily poisoning you right now, right away. It's about long term. There's a story about a family, an older couple in Washington State. I believe they were in Seattle, and I think they were in their 60s, and they were acutely lead poisoned, and they couldn't figure out why they were acutely lead poisoned. And then they had a caseworker, come out to their house, walk through their house, try and figure out what was going on. And it turned out that they'd been to Italy, and I don't know, maybe on an anniversary or something, 10 years before. They had these matching mugs from Italy that they were using every day for their coffee, and they were poisoning themselves every morning by drinking from their coffee. So it's not an unlikely scenario for someone to be poisoned from a mug if it's high lead and being used daily. And that's the problem with mugs, is that if they are high lead and it's your favorite coffee mug, you're likely using it every day. So that's a true concern. But it's more the exception than the rule. And then
What about diapers?
diapers, diapers are fine. I laugh.
Everybody using cloth diapers now.
I mean, diapers are horrible. Diapers are plastic. Diapers are bad for the environment. It's like one of the biggest sources of consumer waste ever is disposable diapers. But with my first baby, I did cloth. He's 24, and I was a single mom, and I was self-employed, so I had time to do cloth diapers. But if you have a job and you have more kids, and who has time for cloth diapers? It's really hard. They're awful. It takes a huge commitment, and so it's challenging. But diapers don't have lead. At least there's that. And the only concern I would have with diapers, if you bought like something from a craftsman who made a cloth diaper cover for, those diaper covers for the cloth diapers, they might have, if they weren't following the law and they were using snaps, there's a possibility that the snaps could have lead paint. But even Etsy people and who are making cloth diaper covers have to follow the current legislation and make sure that they're using child safe products. So getting back to the bathtubs and the housing, my concern was that with the bathtubs, we're not we're not necessarily looking hard enough at that as a concern. And it's really nice to hear that they're looking at that here. I mean, and I don't know how you would determine it, like, because you have to really watch. That's with all of this. You have to watch people's interaction with their stuff and their home to
Right.
figure out why or how they might be being exposed.
Right.
And
So they will actually try to replicate the bath, have the parents draw the bath and let the water sit for the time that they're there investigating, and then come back and test the water. I don't know if that, if they get any lead, but that's a low level lead that they're testing for in water. So that's what they do, I think, to see if the child is actually exposed to lead.
yeah, that's and I actually don't know anybody who's been poisoned by the lead in the water in their bathtub, but I have a couple kids I know who were poisoned by their bathtub. And what happened is they're poisoned by lead dust that accumulated underneath their bathtub in a clawfoot tub, and the
Oh.
child was dropping their toys, and then mom was fishing the toys up from underneath the bathtub and handing it to the child in the bath, who then put it in their mouth. And so you've got lead dust accumulating either from lead paint in the house or leaded enamel in the bathtub,
Right.
underneath the bathtub. And again, that's only going to be applicable for a clawfoot tub.
Well, also these other old metal tubs can have lead, is my understanding.
Yeah, oh, they can, but
Yeah.
you can't get a toy stuck underneath them because they're built in.
So they aren't as dangerous. The
Yeah.
clawfoot ones were much more dangerous. And then the other things are like the dishes. They'll do the leaching of the lead. They'll find out how the family uses the dish, and boil the water for that amount of time, and or see how much lead comes out into the pot that the family had been using.
Yeah, I just visited with a family from India where the mom was born in India. She's the grandma, I guess. Well, she's not a grandma, she's my age. So, and she has kids that are like 30 and 25 and down to 11. And they had a traditional Indian cooking pot made of aluminum that they were using for big stews, and it was lead contaminated aluminum. That's something that's often not looked at. So
Yeah.
That's not cookware.
yeah.
The old pots, not cast iron skillet. Oh, not cast iron skillet. but
Cast iron's going to be okay. Oh, I wanted to mention nickel for you
okay.
too. I know you want to go to look at a house, but whoops.
30, we're supposed to be there.
Okay, is it right across the street or?
No, it's just down the street, like 3 buildings down.
Okay. So number one, stainless steel has high levels of nickel. So if you're cooking in stainless steel, it's generally considered safe, but if you have a nickel allergy, it's a concern.
I guess we made it a little tight there.
Hopefully my kids are okay. I think they're still in the car.
No one got hurt.
So nickel. So I recommend using a combination of uncoated cast iron, like your grandmother's or your great grandmother's, like my grandmother and your grandmother's cast iron. And that so we've got cast iron, then clear glass, like the new Pyrex, not the vintage, but the new stuff, and stainless steel. However, stainless steel has nickel in it. So if you've got stainless steel pots and pans, and so avoid aluminum, because aluminum can be lead contaminated aluminum, and aluminum's bad anyway, but it can definitely be lead contaminated, and especially vintage, and it's just not a good idea. And if you have a nickel allergy, there are nickel-free stainless steel options, and the fun part again is that the less toxic options tend to be less expensive. So IKEA, are there IKEAs here? Are there?
The closest one I think is in Charlotte.
How far away is that?
Like 2 hours, 2.5.
That,
It's worth the trip. It's worth the trip. I love IKEA.
Yeah, so you make a day of it, and if you have kids, you put them in the daycare thing they have there, if they still do that. They probably don't anymore, but so they the stainless steel at IKEA is generally nickel free and very inexpensive. And then you can also spend a fortune buying no nickel. This stuff called NONI, Noni stainless steel. And guess what? It's not nickel free. It has nickel. It has nickel in the 2,000 to 3,000 parts per million range. Typical stainless steel is usually 304 stainless steel or 301 stainless steel. And those stainless steels have nickel in the 80,000 parts per million range, which is not high for stainless steel, but if you have a nickel allergy, it may be high. So look for no nickel stainless steel, which isn't nickel free, or get nickel free stainless steel from IKEA. And then the only problem with IKEA is I used to say to people that their dishes were generally lead free and a good choice, but their ceramic dishes recently have tested positive for lead in the 200 to 800 parts per million range, which isn't probably a problem. It's probably not leaching. But I'm pretty strict since my kids were acutely lead poisoned. I don't want any lead in my dishes or anywhere near my kitchen or food.
What about children's books?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So wait, you might not want to, I'm putting the camera on you. What year were you born? Or what decade were you? Are you about my age, a little bit older than me? So I was born in 1969. I've written a lot about children's books, and I have posted a lot on my blog. I do the XRF testings of consumer goods, and I post them. I post the results, and I tested a lot of children's books from the 60s and 50s and 40s and 30s, and I have a blog post that's broken out by decade, and the older you go, the more lead. And there's a 1950s children's book that I tested recently that was about 4,000 parts per million lead when the hazard level is 90. And I also did a dust wipe sample on that book, and the dust wipe sample tested positive as well. So I know it's coming off and not safe for kids. And so then coming up to the 80s, it lowers. So like in the 70s, most of the books from the 70s are only like between 100 and 800 parts per million lead. But then when you get into the 80s, most of the books are under 200 parts per million lead or negative. And when you get into the 90s, they're pretty much all negative, except for the example we talked about earlier, which is a book that had like a xylophone incorporated or a metal or electronics. They had all those. Yeah, those can have lead. And then so when I say, so don't give children or especially babies that might chew on books, don't give them vintage books. Don't give them antique books. Donate those to your local historical society so they can put them in a museum. And instead give your children new books. They're so inexpensive now. You can get all the books we read as kids, the Dr. Seuss books and the Velveteen Rabbit and all that. You get a new copy for like $3, I mean, it's really inexpensive, and it's worth getting the newer books and saving the vintage books for someone else to collect or throwing them out.
You're telling me the first edition books are full of blood?
Depending on how old they are, yeah. What do you got? Do you have a book collection?
I have one or two books, but I'm like, okay.
Well, and so I think the main concern for me is if a family Bible. If you have a family Bible and you're letting your children play with it, like that's the kind of book that most people have. Not me, I'm Jewish, but I mean, there's, we have we have books too, yeah. But I don't happen to have I have actually that's not true. I have my great grandmother's little books copies, but I put them aside. I don't touch them. The kids don't play with them. I don't read Hebrew, so they're not getting a lot of use. But if you have a family Bible that's from the 60s or earlier, that should be put behind glass, and your children shouldn't play with it or read it. And the other thing there too is children's Bibles, which are beautiful books. But if you have a vintage children's Bible, they shouldn't be reading that or playing with that. And if you want to keep it and has sentimental value, what I suggest is people either put the whole book behind glass or cut pages out and frame particular pages behind glass as a present or to decorate a child's room. As long as it's behind glass, it's fine.
Okay, so we're going to make a transition. I'm going to ask my husband Ron to help me phrase this properly. So we're on Zoom now. Do we have anyone on Zoom, or is everyone on Facebook? If you're on Facebook, that's good, because I can do Facebook as we walk. And then I'll let Tamara drive so you can get your car out of that busy spot. And so your kids are closer to you. So we're going to walk or drive just down to building 1. So you go down Sema Street, and at the last building behind it is building 1.
Let's just see
and it faces the community center at the end of Sema Street.
And so these buildings, when were these buildings built?
These buildings, I think, were built in the 1960s.
And they're brick, so you'd think, oh, not so many hazards, but they've got wood trim on the windows,
Exactly.
original wood doors. They've got railings that have metal that may have been painted with lead paint. I'm just looking at what I see. They
And
might,
the awnings over the houses are painted wood.
and beadboard I see, or maybe there's vinyl up under the awnings on the top high.
Covered the awning, no, not the awnings. They covered up in the eaves with aluminum.
Okay.
But they did not enclose the awnings. That's still painted wood.
Okay.
And sometimes the trim around the door is still painted wood. It's not covered or completely painted.
And then what's you mentioned to me about the history of the controversy here at this housing development. You want to mention that real quickly for people who are watching from afar?
So we're at McDougall Terrace. It is a public housing community, and I'm hoping to catch up with Ashley Kennedy, who stopped by briefly, the president, to talk a little bit about the history. We do have a resident, though, who would love for you to stop by.
Okay. All right. I'm game. I'm going to hand over the technology. There we go.
This is what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to try to do a live video on this same Facebook page. It's on Facebook, Stop Lead Poisoning of Our Children. And it's on Reinvestment Partners Facebook. And I believe it's going to be Reinvestment Partners Facebook Live, and also on the event that you're on right now.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask my husband when to push the button to try to make it go live. And
go over here.
I'm going to retrieve my
You're not gonna
keys
come with
that
us,
are
right?
lead.
You guys my card.
Okay, yeah.
And you guys are
You can go
hysterical.
ahead
I
and
mean, you're
do
really
that.
good. You're fun.
Okay, I have to
And
get
so
back
how
to
old are you?
Facebook.
I'm 25.
I'm actually Lenora Smith's daughter too.
Oh, okay.
So yeah.
Okay, so I was saying how I love how
there.
my sons are 25, 24, 18, 16, and 12. So I got a 16 and 12.
Okay, I'm doing the live video. Stop lead poisoning of our children. Reinvestment Partners Facebook Live.
And it's so nice
Yeah,
meeting
so nice.
you.
Yeah, nice so much. Thank you so much
Can
for
you
all
give-
your
can you give this over to her?
information. You can message me questions and
So are you?
Facebook friend me.
Just
so
push
you know
the
where
button.
to
It'll take a
go. What was
moment.
your name again? What's your name, Pam?
Iana. Selena.
Okay, Iana and Selena. Selena Gomez. I don't know anyone named Iana.
You can think of like Ayala Ranzan, like you know the fictional life.
No.
Her name harder to say.
Should I take my phone or you take my phone?
You have a nice
Take it. No,
day or
Completely
evening.
done with it.
Okay.
All
Whatever.
good.
What time
You
is
still
it?
have battery there?
Yeah, I'm good.
So you're ending the meeting, and I'm doing a live.